All right, hello everybody. Welcome. Thank you all for coming. My name is Daniel Seraldo. I'm the executive director here at the Miami Design Preservation League. I want to welcome you all here. And we're so thrilled today to have in our presence Jerry Fisher, and I've had a great time getting to know him, spending the day with him today. We went to St. Patrick's Church, which is...
Somebody left their glasses.
Okay, somebody left their glasses. Pink with a clear frame. Well, put it here. Thank you, Joel. So we went to St. Patrick's Church, which many of you know Carl Fisher donated the land on which that church was built. And we went all the way up top to the bell tower, and you'll hear some stories about that. But Jerry Fisher is here with his wife, Josie. They've flown in from Oregon just for this very special lecture. So we're very happy to have them. It's the first of our spring lecture series entitled Made in Miami. And you all have the invite on your chairs. So the next one after this will be April 19th, Paul Kaplan, Jewish History in South Florida. Then we will have Joel Levine, The Lost Treasures of Sunny Isles, on May 16th. And May 30th, we'll have Bill Wisser, Art Deco Doorways of Miami Beach. And we're very happy to have you all here. We just came from City Hall, and we were very excited because the mayor and commission heard that Jerry Fisher was in town and gave a proclamation naming today Jerry Fisher Day in Miami Beach. That was very special. And so Jerry Fisher never imagined the consequences of writing a biography about his cousin, Carl Fisher. But the book has touched many lives and has been of great interest, and we're very happy to have him here. David McCullough, the famous author, wrote a 2-page handwritten letter about the book as author to author, which Jerry has framed above his desk today. So anytime he's down, he says he looks at the picture and the letter and feels good again. And so for those who have not read the book yet, The Pacesetter, we have copies available at the store. And right after this lecture ends, Jerry's going to go to the store and sign the copies. So please consider purchasing the book. It's an amazing book. And so without further ado, let's all welcome Jerry Fisher.
Let's see, I brought Carl Fisher's glasses. There we go. Yeah, but I think I better put them away because Carl Fisher doesn't like anybody messing with his glasses. First of all, I would like to thank the Miami Design Presentation League and Daniel for making this event possible. Unfortunately, Carl Fisher, one of America's great entrepreneurs, has all been forgotten. This is a man who carved the playground of Miami Beach from the swamps of the mosquito-infested jungle. He was Mr. Miami Beach. He sculptured Montauk, New York, made Long Island a fashionable place to live, and even created the Indianapolis Speedway, which hosts one of the world's most premier events. The Indianapolis 500 he designed, the first transcontinental highway to America, the Lincoln Highway and the Dixie Highway, awesome accomplishments for their time or any. He brought the country into the 20th century, similar to the railroad that brought the country together in the 19th century. None of his landmarks achievements bear his name. Millions travel on his highway, attend his premier racing events, and enjoy this magical city he created. All were the legends of a poor Indiana boy whose dreams changed America forever. Why has such a man virtually been forgotten? In my book, you can see he fiercely guarded his private life. Carl Fisher was a humble man. Sure, he showboated at times, bringing attention to the project he was promoting, which needed the publicity to succeed. Privately, he remained secretive about himself. He was opposed of any publication of biographical information about himself. The book reveals the attempts by Encyclopedia Britannica, among others, who sought his cooperation with no avail. I first met Jane Fisher at her home in December of 1963. I, along with several of the University of Nebraska friends, went to see the Cornhuskers play in the Orange Bowl. I go into detail about this encounter more thoroughly in my book. As we parted ways, Jane said to me, "I am afraid Carl is all but forgotten." Unfortunately, this would remain true for many years, as I did not take this message seriously. Perhaps it was because I did not know what to do. My writing experience had consisted of one semester of journalism course in college. It would take a near-death experience for me to take action. I realized that if I did nothing, Jane Fisher's prediction would be correct. Finally, in 1998, the Pacesetter, the untold story of Carl Fisher, was published. It has been 50-some years since my visit with Jane. The revised, updated book you see now was released in 2014. In addition, a screenplay and an 8-hour TV miniseries treatment have both been completed. You will now get into the glimpse into the life of this mysterious, complex man. Truly, a man whose life was Shakespearean in character, Carl G. Fisher is rarely matched in history for his creativity and accomplishment. Growing up poor in Greensburg, Indiana in the 1880s, Carl had an absentee alcoholic father. Carl quit school at the age of 12 due to severe autism that caused people to think that he was slow-witted, and his classmates teased him mercifully. He worked aboard the trains as a news butcher boy and schooled himself in the principles of business. So when in the 1890s, the bicycles became all the rage, young Carl opened his own bicycle repair shop in Indianapolis and fingered $50,000 line of credit to purchase 200 bicycles from the biggest manufacturer of the country. Besides selling bicycles, 18-year-old daredevil Carl raced them and met a fellow racer that developed into a lifelong friendship, Barney Oldfield. With Barney and two other friends, Carl founded the Zigzag Cycling Club and brainstormed all over the Midwest on dirt tracks made for horse racing. But with his first encounter with a horseless carriage, Carl, only 25, knew he was on the wave of the future. He sold off his bicycles and began selling automobiles. He opened up one of the first automobile dealerships in the country, selling Stoddard Dayton, Stutz, Packards, and Rios. Carl had a showmanship to rival P.D. Barnum when he sailed over Indianapolis aboard a Stoddard Dayton that dangled beneath a helium-filled balloon. Carl quickly jumped into the auto racing circle and found he was breaking world speed records. In 1904, he set a new world record for 2 miles on a dirt track in 2 minutes and 2 seconds. Meanwhile, Carl was a successful car salesman, but he was frustrated that automobiles couldn't be driven at night due to the poor performance of head lanterns. So he and an engineer friend, James Allison, bought the patent to ethylene gas fixture, which put visible headlamps on every new car built in America. They became millionaires. They called their company Presto Light. He sold the company to Union Carbide in 1911 for $6 million. That was a staggering amount of money at that time. It was perfect timing, as Cadillac introduced the electric battery the next year in 1912. Carl remained close to the car racing industry and was continually distressed by the lack of performance of American cars to compare models out of Europe. He realized that 100 American car manufacturers, at that time, had no place to practically test their cars to find the weaknesses inherent in their design. During this time, he met Jane Watts, an Indiana beauty. They married, and Carl was 20 years her senior. Out of frustration, Carl created and built the famous Indianapolis Motor Speedway, where car makers could come and test their products. But the track of crushed rock and tar were inadequate for the speeds of race cars, and the first race was a disaster where the track broke apart and caused fatal crashes. The Indianapolis Star reported death at Indy, 5 killed at Speedway. This was May of 1909. There actually were dozens of people that were injured, bystanders, because there was no protective barrier from the cars. The investment would be a total loss when Carl came up with a solution, as he did. He covered the track with 3.2 million 10-pound bricks, and the Speedway was back in business. On May 28, 1911, Carl held the inaugural Indianapolis 500 auto race. Carl was a social maverick. The invitations he accepted were mostly business, and friends understood that he preferred to entertain them. To Carl, parties with their social gossip and banter were a waste of time. He liked to socialize, but only at his own home. When the evening conversations turned to small talk, Carl excused himself and retreated to his bedroom, leaving Jade to entertain the guests. Carl preferred reading a number of books, which were stacked at his bedside, with his dog, Ep, lying on the bed beside him. He would practice this choice throughout his entire life, surprising even the most notable guests. Many people who met Carl found it difficult to believe that his formal education ended in the 6th grade. Self-educated and an avid book reader at a young age, Carl could speak with authority on almost any subject, but at times his actions would make even his friends wonder. At a relaxed dinner party, he picked up a cut glass goblet that one of his guests had given them as a wedding present, and he threw it out the window at a cat fight. He was proud that he hit his target, but oblivious to the fact that he had broken the prize goblet. Meanwhile, he had another itch. Carl believed the country needed a highway, one stretching from New York City to San Francisco, a transcontinental highway, all paved, linking east and the west. Cities would sprout up, and more highways could branch off of it north and south. All it needed was a little push. and he made it happen. He called it the Lincoln Highway, of course, after Abraham Lincoln. Here's a picture back east. This is Carl on one of his trips. This is in the desert. As you know, the Lincoln Highway, they had to go through all the different states and create the best way possible. There was a lot of politics involved. Every governor, every city wanted the Lincoln Highway to go through their part, and for obvious reasons, and Carl had to deal with all that. This going through the desert, marking the Lincoln Highway. Here's the Lincoln Highway. This is back east. Actually, Highway 40 was the name of the Lincoln Highway back east. Some of you are familiar with that. This was the sign post along the Lincoln Highway that the Boy Scouts across the country laid. This cement signs so people would not get lost. The next picture is when business magnates, what business magnate was completed without his yacht. So Carl had one built and he sailed it to Miami, where he found a peninsula with a half-completed bridge spanning the Biscayne Bay. Carl explored and found the sandbars held nothing but marshes, mangroves, mosquitoes, and malaria. Carl was described as restless and bored in 1912. A new project, however, was literally on the horizon. Looking from his house across Biscayne Bay, he could see the jungle-like peninsula. On his way to fishing trips in the Gulf Stream, he could see the Atlantic side, a far different side, a beautiful ocean beach extending for miles with coconut palms. He also came across this partially finished wooden bridge from Miami to the peninsula, a 2.5-mile distance, called the Collins Folly. That's what the residents called it. When Carl asked the reason for the bridge's lack of progress, he heard the story of John Collins and of his financial distress. The moment Fisher heard about Collins, who was 74, he started to build the bridge. His ears perked up. Such a man must be worth knowing. Perhaps he had a bigger idea than any of his critics dreamed of. When he visited his lawyer, Frank Schutz, also from Indiana, Schutz told him, "You know, Carl, you've got plenty of money and you're too young to retire. Why don't you lend that old man some money and let him finish his bridge? It would give you something to do and give you interest down here." When Carl decided to help Collins finish his bridge, he lent him $50,000 plus interest and the caveat of including 200 acres of beachfront land, 1 mile long, 1,850 feet wide from the ocean to the bay. Carl purchased hundreds of acres more from local real estate agents. Carl envisioned his city would take 6 months, but in fact it would take 10 years to build and millions of dollars. Miami Beach was becoming the magic city. Carl's clever promotions were newspapers across the country. One of them was President Harding visiting alongside Carl in 1923. The president would say, "This is a beautiful place." Sales skyrocketed. Land speculation followed and would become news of the day. Some lots flipping several times a day. This is Carl in his speedboat, and actually Prohibition was from 1920 to 1933. Carl made many trips to Cuba. He knew all the presidential's high officials there, and he would take rum in his boat. He had a hidden floor in his boat, and he would smuggle rum out of Cuba back to the United States. Carl was really not a rum drinker, but he had plenty of friends that were. So Carl brought the rum back and would ship it literally through cars and elsewhere to his friends in Detroit and all over. So you could say he was a bootlegger like Al Capone. The stories of enormous profits made in Florida land were sufficient bait. A lot in the business center of Miami Beach had sold for $800 in the early days of development and had resold for $150,000 in 1924. A poor woman who had bought a piece of land near Miami in 1896 for $25 was able to sell it in 1925 for $150,000. Such tales were legend. Every visitor to the Gold Coast could pick them up by the dozens, and many, if not most of them, were quite true wealthy, though the profits were largely on paper. No wonder the rush for land justified the current anecdote of a native saying to a visitor, "Want to buy a lot?" and the visitor at once replying, "Sold." Jane tells a story that demonstrates not only how others consider them fabulously wealthy, but also how one casual Carl encountered when about the theft of his property. The public point of view of us was summed up by an aged native Carl discovered on the beach, piling building material on his rickety wagon. The old man was grumbling to himself because he couldn't get a bathtub aboard the wagon, a tub waiting to be installed in the Lincoln Highway. Carl rode the Miami Beach, early in the mornings with his horse, and he watched the old cobbler before he asked him what he was doing. "I can't load this damn thing on my wagon," the old man answered testily. "Who does it belong to?" Carl wanted to know. "That man Fisher," snapped the native. "I figure I have as much right to it as he has. So no one has the right to be as rich as that man Fisher." "You're perfectly right," Carl agreed amiably, and he got off his horse and helped the old man pack the loot onto the wagon. The beach was unquestionably attracting customers. In February 1922, more than 2,000 prospective customers had been turned away at the Flamingo Hotel with a lower rate of about $15 per day. Still in debt, Carl urged other investors to come and build more hotels, suggesting that a dozen first-class hotels were needed. In 1923, he expanded the Flamingo, adding 6 more rooms. He also built the Nautilus Hotel, which opened up in January the 10th, 1924. At the cost of $870,000, the Nautilus, as Howard Kleinberg described it, offered the ultimate for the wealthy guests. Posh rooms and a swimming pool with cabanas, beautiful stairways, and the chandeliers, a gourmet dining room, and of course, an adjoining polo fields. The hotel's polyreperic notes were built on cheap land that would not otherwise have been developed. The hotels then raised the land values. Carl's business at the beach was never hotels, it was the land. The hotels were only a come-on, a necessary nuisance to draw customers and hold them long enough for his salesman to sell them house lots. His plan for Miami Beach was a city of winter homes. Carl built 4 hotels in Miami Beach: the Lincoln, King Cole, the Nautilus, and the Flamingo. Each visitor was his paying guest. He would not have bellboys at the Lincoln because he insisted that tipping embarrassed people. In a kitchen near the lounge stood an enormous refrigerator where meats and cold cuts were kept, so that when guests came in at night, they could feel at home and raid the kitchen free of charge. On each floor, a maid kept a constant vigor on all the guests' clothes. If a garment became wrinkled, it was pressed and returned without cost. Carl Fisher was appalled at the extreme speculation and greed that was everywhere. Carl expressed his concerns of the excessive risk buyers were taking by placing ads in newspapers. It was not good for real estate values. He practiced what he preached by placing restrictions on his real estate ads. Buyers were required to put 25% down, a payment for a city lot, and commence building a house within 1 year of purchase date. Because his real estate offices only controlled approximately half of the land marked for sale, he could not stop the frenzied buyers. Carl's preference for Long Island summers led to one of his most ambitious ventures. In 1925, a real estate broker took Carl to Montauk, New York, located 30 miles past Southampton, to show him a vast tract of 10,000 acres, empty, windswept dunes and beaches on the innermost point of Long Island. In his overachieving life, Carl purposely made the acquaintance of many important people. He was personal friends of and sometimes enemies with people like Henry Ford, President Warren Harding, Will Rogers, Harvey Firestone, Teddy Roosevelt, Thomas Edison, Al Capone, William Vanderbilt II, J.C. Penney, and the founders of Carl companies such as Stutz General Motors, William Durand, General of Chevrolet, and Henry Joy of Packard. All were his close friends. It is interesting to note that all of these people I just mentioned were highly educated. Henry Joy, for example, president of Packard, was a Yale graduate. And here was Carl with a 6th grade education. I always found that very astounding, how he could meet with these high officials. And of all the letters, which were over probably 10,000 letters I went through at the Miami Library, I never found one word or any of these gentlemen speaking negative about Carl and his education, which I really found astounding. After 12 years of marriage, Jane made an announcement that elated the man. She was pregnant. After horrifying 4 days of labor, she gave birth to their son, Carl, always wanted. Carl's entire life changed. Business investments and developments meant little to him now, as he devoted all of his attention to Carl Jr. Then tragedy happened. The child lived only 26 days before it died of a rare digestive condition. Carl fell into utter depths of despair. His life changed. He vowed to Jane he would never put her through that heartache again and would never have another child. Then he threw himself back into one thing he knew how to do well: make money. This is a boat that Carl admired. Vanderbilt II had this boat built for him. Carl went to the boat builder and told the boat builder he wanted the exact same boat, but with 1 foot longer. In 1925, Carl purchased 9,632 acres in Montauk, New York, for $2.5 million. Carl planned to entice Miami Beach residents to summer in Montauk Manor, which is still today and is turned into condos. Very nice place. In fact, sometimes hurricanes hit Montauk. There's a big siren in the Montauk Manor where the residents have learned to go for safety. They go to the Montauk Manor. And also, during World War II, the Army Corps took over the Montauk Manor and tried to destroy it with dynamite. because they wanted to build a new vicinity there. They found that the Montauk Manor had 4.5 feet cement walls, so they decided not to do it. In the middle of building this massive infrastructure, a major hurricane struck Miami Beach on September 16, 1926. Hundreds of lives were lost, thousands injured, and homes destroyed. Carl left Montauk and returned immediately to Miami Beach, spending millions of dollars to rebuild the city. There were no FEMA programs at that time. Carl knew that he had to do this himself because he could not depend upon or even wait for the government to build Miami Beach again. By now it was 1929 and headlines read, stock market crashes, fortunes wiped out, and Carl was not immune. What money he had, he threw into bad investments until he was nearly broke. He was also dying of cirrhosis of the liver due to heavy drinking. Circumstances like the hurricane and the depression created devastating consequences, and both were beyond his control. Montauk was the end of Fisher's career. The fates were against him. From every side, adversity threw blows at this dream builder. The tragic Florida hurricane of 1926, political interference, and finally the crash of 29 were the final touches. He had gambled heavily on Montauk and had lost. Mortgages on his Florida property were foreclosed, and soon the bulk of his Fisher fortune was wiped out. At one time, he was worth over $100 million. That was on paper, of course. Joe Copps, a longtime Fisher associate, said of him, the reason Carl lost was the way he did business. He wouldn't sell a lot unless the project was completely developed. I believe Carl was the most honest man I ever met. He maintained that people shouldn't buy anything that they weren't completely sure of. He reserved the risk for himself. Carl continued to spend summers at Montauk and winters in Miami Beach. Carl's final years. No words by this author can better describe the bond which existed between individuals than their own handwritten words. On July the 7th, 1939, Carl received an invitation from Thomas Pencost to a luncheon at the Pencost Hotel on July 13th to celebrate the 19th anniversary of the Miami Beach Chamber of Commerce. I would feel honored to have you as my guest. Carl accepted. Afterwards, Thomas Pencost wrote Carl a letter of appreciation for his coming to his luncheon on March 14th. Of all the people who attended the birthday luncheon yesterday at the Pencost Hotel, I felt more honored by having you present than anyone else. I know as a rule you shy away from the functions of this kind, and that is why I feel so deeply appreciative of your presence. I hope you do not mind the little joke we played on you, for I know everyone present enjoyed it, and that you do not feel have any bad effects from this celebration. Please accept my heartfelt appreciation and with best wishes and kindest personal regards. Carl never saw the letter. On July 15, the day it arrived, he was rushed to St. Francis Hospital with a gastric hemorrhage and passed away that afternoon at 4:52 p.m. Fred Humphrey, Dan Mahoney, Frank Kotzenstein, and Dr. Boris were at his side. He was 69 years old. Jane was at Soblamundo, her estate in Catskills, when a newspaper reporter called to her to say that Carl Fisher was dying and asked to see her, but Carl died before she was able to leave for Florida. Margaret, his second wife, arrived an hour after Carl's death. Major newspapers across the country covered Carl's story. Carl's income in his later years would come mainly from a $10,000 yearly pension paid by the Bayshore Company, equivalent to about $175,209 today. Though this would be suitable income for most, it was pittance compared to his early lifetime earnings. In the end, he was not broke financially, but broke spiritually. His estate was valued a little over $54,000, and of course that would be a little over $1 million today with inflation. Carl was cremated, and his urn containing his ashes remained in Miami until January of 1943. There were talks between Margaret and the city of Miami Beach as to where Carl should be buried and who would be responsible for the costs involved. No agreement was reached, and the urn was later moved to the mausoleum at Crown Hill Cemetery in Indianapolis and placed with the rest of his family on January the 12th, 1943. On April the 10th, 1941, Miami Beach citizens dedicated the only memorial in America at that time about the accomplishments of Carl Graham Fisher. The centerpiece features a bronze bust of Carl wearing his floppy hat and smiling. The inscription reads, "Carl Graham Fisher, he created a great city out of a jungle." On September the 9th, 2017, there was another memorial erected at a historical society in Greensburg, Indiana, and that was Carl Fisher's birthplace. I was asked to write a summary of no more than 300 words to be engraved on the memorial. When I arrived, I was told it was 301 words. There was, in a sense, another memorial already in place. On one of Carl's trips to Cuba, he had heard the sounds of Caribbean bells, which had a profound effect on him, a peacefulness that filled the air. Carl had never been able to raise enough money for the bell tower to house the Caribbean bells, and Father Barry had promised that one day he would build the tower. This is where Carl made the prediction that on Lincoln and Washington, 25 years after watching the clearing the jungle, Carl made a statement, "This will be one of the most beautiful shopping streets in the world." And that was on the corner, as you can see there. Shortly after Carl's death, the Miami Herald columnist Helen Rich wrote, "One afternoon, just to make him feel better, Father Barry brought a drawing of the canopy he had planned to build to house the bells, and discovered that those bells had meant more to Carl Fisher than anyone had ever realized. And if he was to hear them, it would be necessary to work fast." The canopy was started, and as it progressed, Carl Fisher progressed with it, so that he was among the many hundreds who attended the dedication that night. Nobody saw him because he stayed in his car, and so nobody knew that Carl Fisher, the man of great vision, sat with tears streaming down his rugged cheeks when at last he heard the Angelus ring out of his own Miami Beach. The sound of those ringing bells are still heard today. And we learned today that the bells, I asked, weigh a couple of them between 8,000 and 10,000 pounds each, which is incredible. I appreciate you taking the time to learn more about this great legend, Carl Fisher. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larry. So we'll take a couple questions from the audience before we go over for the book signing. Yes.
What's the address of that church?
I'm sorry, which St. Francis Church?
Yeah, with the bells.
St. Patrick's.
St. Patrick.
Yeah, isn't that what it is? It's called, yeah.
It's off of 41st and Alton Road.
Garden Avenue.
Oh, Garden Avenue.
Yeah, and the bells ring, well, if you're there every noon at 12 o'clock, 12 times, and then, of course, I guess at Mass, they ring also. So it's just quite an experience to hear those same bells that all these years, they're still ringing.
You heard the bell?
Are there any markers at 500 for Fisher?
You mean in Indianapolis?
Yeah.
Yes, right in front, if you go to the Indy Speedway, you'll see Carl Fisher and his other partners. There's a big bronze statue that the Indy 500 has dedicated to him, yes.
Can you tell us what happened to Jackie, his adopted son?
I knew that. That's why I came out with a second book. My first book came out in 1998, and this book here has 150 more pages. One of the things I learned about Jackie was that was his adopted son, excuse me, and he moved to Los Angeles, was an apartment manager, and died, I believe, in 1962. And there was kind of always a strange relationship between he and Jane, and really Carl really never really accepted the adopted son.
Zach?
Is the house on North Bay Road that belong to Carl Fisher?
Is the house?
That's what we saw with the tower. Yes.
Oh, yes. It's identical, yes. Still there.
No, I had the pleasure to meet the Hart family who took over their house.
Yeah.
You know, they did the castaways.
Right.
So we were very good friends with them. We lived, my in-laws lived right next door.
Oh, I see.
Well, how far north would that be? What's the address?
You don't really understand.
It's so the Carl Fisher house that is still existing now. It is right across from the 51st and Alton statue. So we went there today, and if you just turn around from the statue, you'll see the tower there of the house. I don't know exactly the street. Does anyone know in the audience? But I think it's around the 51st. Oh, yes.
There was a lot of gambling in Miami Beach between the 20s and the 50s. What was Carl Fisher's attitude towards gambling, including gambling at his hotels?
That's an excellent question. I didn't have time to go through this. Of course, there's just so much. But I go pretty well in detail about Carl was really adamant about Al Capone. Of course, you know Al Capone came to Miami Beach. He came there on that big St. Valentine's massacre in Chicago. Where was Carl? Where was Al Capone? Miami Beach. Carl really disliked Al Capone. Al Capone disliked Carl Fisher. And they had finally, Carl wanted to get a court hearing in front of a judge because he felt that Al Capone lowered the real estate values with his, notorious things he brought in, all that. So Carl took him to court. Carl was promised that 50 people would show up as witnesses to testify against Al Capone. Even Harvey Firestone and others. The day of the court hearing, only 2 witnesses came, Al Capone and this little Jewish lady. Those 2 were the only ones that testified against Al Capone. And I think it was rumored that, I was talking to somebody the other day, that Al Capone disliked Carl Fisher, and I think that if Carl Fisher had won that case, that Al Capone certainly would have put a hit on him, and life would have changed from that.
All right, maybe one more question. Yes.
About Carl Fisher Island, was that land that was owned by him?
Oh, that's a good point. I previously said that none of the achievements at Carl Fisher are named after him. Some people said, well, you should say it the Fisher Highway or Fisher Speedway, da-da-da. Of course, Carl had none of that. The story about the Fisher Island is, Carl made Fisher Island But what happened was the locals here in this area kept referring to it, they see that and say, what's that? Oh, that's Fisher Island. And because the locals kept repeating Fisher Island, Fisher Island, Fisher Island became the name. It certainly wasn't because of Carl.
Question. Didn't Vanderbilt trade his yacht with Fisher for that?
I'm sorry, for what?
For the,
Yes.
For the island?
Yes, yes, yes. And I just told you the story about the boat and everything, so.
Okay, oh, well.
One question, wouldn't it be a good idea if we had, let's say, a statue or some marker or something like that for Carl Fisher on Lincoln Road? On where?
I'm sorry.
Right, on Lincoln Road.
What's that?
Would it be a good idea to have a statue there?
Oh, yes, yes, that would be wonderful, yes.
All right. Oh, the question was, would it be a good idea to have a statue of Carl Fisher on Lincoln Road?
Yes, yes, we all agree.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So thank you all again. Let's give Jerry a round of applause.